Previously, we compared the Fluval FX2 to Big Brother, the FX6. Well, today, we're going to compare it to something that a lot of you wanted to know about, the 407. Hello, everyone. This is Bentley, and today we're going to do a comparison between these two guys, the FX2, the new canister from Fluval, and this guy over here, a brand new Inbox 407. Before we get started, a couple disclaimers. As in previous videos, the FX2 here was provided to me by Fluval, so this is sponsored by Fluval. However, in the case of the 407, I paid for this completely out of pocket. I used the PetSmart trick, so we'll have to do a small video on that eventually, right? It is still new in box, so we need to get this thing out of the box so we can do an ample comparison between FX2 and 407. Okay, so we've got the 407 out of the box. And like the whole FX series, basically any of the Fluval canisters, it comes with Fluval's kind of patented ribbed tubing. This is, of course, a smaller version meant for the OX series, so 305, 306, 307, etc. 407 is the biggest one in that series. And then there's also a package with all your piping. Now, of course, you have a different inlet outlet. It's all in one go with a big handy stop lever. Unlike the FX2 that has the two larger ball valves at the top of the canister. First things first, let's compare size. Right? Pretty familiar with Fluval canisters. This is a thinner box style canister. But if you look comparatively, right, just see this versus my head. Versus our FX2. A lot chunkier. But you'll notice, and you can even see it here in just right in front of me, with the ball valves on top, the FX2 sits about yay high. This is a bit taller, and you can just see that difference. And when you put the nozzles on top and they're coming out the top, it's got about 3 inches more of height. So if height is your primary concern, this is actually a taller filter compared to the FX2 and the FX4. Width-wise, if you're dealing with a more compact space as far as width as opposed to height, obvious difference between these two. So let's crack open our 407 here and look at what we're talking about for its media capacity. When we get into our 407, the first thing you're going to notice is this tray for the sponges. Right, so you've got two of those, and then your more coarse foam that sits toward the outside of the canister. Right, so you've got two different, you've got a coarser and a slightly less coarse. It's kind of hard to tell. I don't know if up close you can see that, but the porosity difference between these foams is not that much. It's a lot more apparent in the FX2. So if we're going to look at this foam setup, and one of the things that's a little different here is because of the way that this kind of stacks its trays, you can see you're just kind of friction fitting your foam. Let me get this set in correctly on both sides here. Whereas if we compare it to the FX2, right, you've got a obvious channel for your coarse foam along the outside here. And then if you are using the internal tray system or just these foams, because you could stack these foams without these little trays, right? Yeah, they friction fit, but they're sitting straight in and down, nice and snug, compared to this kind of sideways setup, because this is designed to sit here, right? Because our water flow comes through up, right? So it's going to come through all this sponge on the side of the canister and then filter up the rest of the media baskets. Now the rest of your media, you have a top basket here. Usually this is where your like chemical filtration is going to be. In particular, what's actually surprising is that the 407 comes equipped with a phosphate removing pad. And then little packs of carbon. So it is very clearly pre-setting you up with some chemical filtration in this top bin. And then similar to the FX2 where you have a handle to remove the rest of them kind of nice and simply, you have the remaining 3 media trays. I'll set this guy over to the side for a second. Now, included is 2 more sets of carbon. They really have included a lot of chemical filtration, which is definitely not how I personally would set this filter up. But then you have 3 trays, all designed the same. These little box trays here. And because of their size, see you've got media in the center here. This is the same standard, like basic ceramic ring that is also included with the FX series of filters. And then our bottom tray here has some much finer sets of foams. So you got a nice chunky piece of foam in the bottom here. I like this a lot. Chunky foam I'm a fan of that just because it can hold a lot. And this again is not as coarse as the outside foams here. It is a little bit finer foam. Let's see if we can bring that up. Not sure how well you can see that, but it is a bit finer. And if I compare it visually, it's actually, I want to see, can you guys see this on camera? I'm curious. But get that to focus there. Versus this foam. This foam is actually slightly finer in its porosity than what comes in the FX2 visually looking. Yeah, it looks ever so slightly finer. Now it might be the same, and it just has to be a matter of the cut. But just visually looking at it, it looks like the difference between 40 and 45. So not a huge jump, right? We're not talking like 60 and 40, but then you have these super fine filtration pads, and similarly the FX2 has a very fine filtration pad in its last tray as well to help you with your particle filtration. So we put these back in there. So they include a lot of foam in the grand scheme of things. You have one whole tray plus all this side foam, right? This is our nice coarse foam to get some of our bigger particulates but still allow water flow. More medium and a fine in the bottom of this. And then you have 2 trays of chemical filtration and 1 tray of media. Now, me personally, I'm keeping this bottom tray of foam, and I'm loading all 3 of these things up with media. Now, if we compare the amount of media that we can fit in these, we know that the FX2 can hold just about 3 liters of the BioFX media. And if I compare my about 1 liter bag here, I would gamble if you were to fill all 3 of the trays up with the exception of the foam tray, you could fit a very similar amount of media into these trays. You can see here's this bag. About half of it is coming out. It's probably slightly more. This is about 1 liter here, roughly. It's still a little dusty. I've had to rinse the heck out of that stuff. But we're getting kind of similar capacity in the 407 at a visual inspection. Now, granted, the best way to do this would be to measure all of the media out perfectly and compare tray to tray. I want this to be a simpler and easier process. Otherwise, this would be a massive pain in the butt video, right? So the real question becomes, how much more sponge, effectively speaking, are you getting out of the 2 trays in the FX2 compared to this. And what I would say is, if you look at this sponge on the internal here with this stuff on the external, you're fairly similar to what's in one tray here. So one in one of these being about one of this, slightly more. Okay, the only difference is not these internal trays, right? These little guys. But you get a kind of similar version built into this bottom tray here. So realistically, you're getting a really similar amount of sponge media plus ceramic media capacity between these two. Okay, so why FX2 versus 407? This is where I think it's important that we break out some of the bigger stats when we start talking about pump speed, right? Another thing to keep in mind is that with the 407, it doesn't have the same smart pump. So looking at the statistics for the 407, the total chamber capacity, according to Fluval, in the 4 of these trays, plus this, as far as media capacity, and that's accounting for the sponge that's already in these, is 6 liters. That's a lot of capacity. And in looking at the FX2, it has a very similar amount of capacity. Now, if you discount these, right, you're looking at about 4 liters of capacity in these bins. You get 3.9 liters of capacity in the central media tray, right? So that doesn't account for the outside sponge. Very, very similar capacity. So the big question is pump. You get the smart pump in the FX2. You do not get the smart pump in the Fluval 407. In fact, when you need to prime the 407, you have to use this upgraded version. They used to have this little teeny tiny thing. Now they've got this nice handle, and it actually has a pretty good operation to it. I can say from having some older 4.0, or I guess it's the 3.0 models. I've got a 305 and I think a 206, if I remember correctly. And I might have a 405 somewhere too. Can't remember. I've got a lot of filters. But big upgrade there as far as that is concerned. Now, pump capacities, here's where this gets quite a bit different. So the FX2's smart pump puts out 475 gallons per hour. Now keep in mind, usually when these readings are done, that's with the canister completely empty, nothing impeding the flow. The 407, our little like trash can looking box here, it reminds me of a small trash can, I can't help it. Sorry, Fluval, but you just got to deal with that. 383. You're losing almost 100 gallons per hour as far as pump maximum output. Fluval will say that the 407 is good for anywhere between a 50 and 100 gallon tank, whereas the FX2 can handle up to 150 gallons. I would say realistically, you're probably looking at either of these could efficiently do a 75 gallon tank because their media capacity is similar, but if you wanted the higher flow because you want to just churn more water, and that's a matter of the type of fish you're keeping, certain fish just like a little bit more flow output, you would want to look at the FX2. Also, you get the smart pump, which can be very nice. It's effectively auto-priming. You do need to put a certain amount of water in the base body itself, but it will prime itself from there. You need to prime the 407. Similar, it has to have a certain amount of water in it. Those are close enough. The smart pump is just a little better at purging any excess air that might get into the canister over time, whereas the 407 series doesn't necessarily have the design built in to do that. So you might get some air purging that you see a little more visibly as opposed to the pump turning itself off once every 24 hours, kind of letting itself gas out some, so to speak, fill up with more water, and then fire itself back up and get back to going. That's one of the advantages to the smart pump. The other major difference, of course, is just height. Like we showed earlier, the 407 is taller. Other than that, Really, the difference comes down to this. If you want the stronger pump and you don't have as much height in your cabinetry, but you have the width, you might want to look at the FX2. If you don't have as much width, but you've got room for height, and you don't necessarily need that strong pump, you probably want the 407. Price is the other big factor here. Retail, the 407 is $269.99 US. I've seen the FX2, what little I've seen of it, about $289.99. And I learned something important from Fluval. They have an exclusivity with new products. So something like the FX2 here is only available in local fish stores that carry Fluval products for a certain period of time before they open it up to more wider dispersal of sales online. That is part of why you cannot find this filter online yet. Relatively soon, I talked to Fluval about it. I was asking, like, why can't we find this filter anywhere? I've had lots of people ask about it. And said, oh, well, here's why. And that's kind of nice, right? It's nice that Fluval does that. They don't just open it up to the wide world of everything right away. They try to help local fish stores have a little exclusivity. I can appreciate that. Frustrating for us as hobbyists, maybe, but I think it's good for the masses. The real question becomes, FX2 or 407? I think the big difference here is if you can get either of these filters on sale, and especially if you can use the PetSmart trick, you're going to save a lot more money with this particular filter. An example would be that if you use the app, you can get the retail price on this thing at PetSmart, or at least I have recently, down to $229 instead of $269, so you save $40 there. And then you can use coupons to bring that price down even more, where the FX2 isn't quite available in big boxes yet, so you can't really do the same thing. So if you do find an FX2, it's going to cost you a decent chunk more. Is that worth it? And I think that's the question you have to ask yourself. To me personally, I tend to run bigger tanks, and if I have the space, I quite like the Smart Pump. However, this is a lot easier to hide because it's just such a slim body. It's a little taller, yes, but it's a slim body, and slim bodies can be a lot easier to pack away in a cabinet. Is the price difference worth the pump? Because that's really what we have. Similar media capacity, little bit difference when it comes to maintenance and some of the like ball valves and stuff, but in the end, you're probably going to have to maintain the 407 a little more often, but not by much compared to the FX2. And the difference would be something like, if you were going to maintain the FX2 every 6 months, you probably want to do the 407 every 4. So about a third more often, right? 1 extra maintenance per year. Not that bad. It really comes down to that pump. The big difference between the two of these is the pump. There also is just inherently in the FX2's tray design, because of the way these are designed, you get a little bit better flow through without bypass in the media, where the 4 can have a little more potential for bypass as these sponges start to clog up. As long as you're on top of your maintenance, it's never going to be a problem. What I will say is that the difference in tray design, you don't really need media bags with your media in these. These trays you can just take out individually and rinse them nice and easily. I would argue with this style of tray, you are better off having your media in a bag inside it and removing the media to clean everything out. Necessary? No. Just a matter of making maintenance a little bit easier or more thorough. That's a personal choice. So that's it. That's a comparison between these two. Now, eventually I'll set this up on a tank, and I'll have this going on another tank, right? So we'll get to compare my own personal real-world results between these two. But just as a rough comparison, looking at the pumps, the size of these bodies, all that kind of information, this is what we're dealing with. And honestly, the difference really comes down to where you're trying to fit this and pump power. That's it. Those are the differences. And if you're trying to do a bigger tank on only one canister filter, FX2, more reliable. It's going to handle it a lot better. 407, still probably going to do a great job. I would say anything up to 75 gallons, both of these things are probably going to perform almost exactly the same. Slight difference in pump output. That's it. Very, very similar otherwise. So with that being said, guys, let me know what are your thoughts on what we've looked at so far, the comparison. Which one would you choose? Would you rather have the FX2 or the 407 in your particular case, and why? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd really love to hear from you guys. If you enjoyed this video, give it a little like. If you're new to my channel, consider subscribing so you can see more product reviews and comparisons like this. I've got all sorts of tips and tricks and events, interviews, lots of things that I do in the fish world. Don't miss it. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.